So you've dedicated your whole life, over decades, to making revolution and emancipating humanity. And I want to talk about revolution. It's a word that people throw around all the time. And people mean radically, very wildly different things when they use it. What is a real revolution, and why is that necessary?
Well, it's not a new variation of Charmin toilet paper. Okay, that's the first thing we can say. You know, it's not a change just in the culture, to be more serious. It means that you actually overthrow the existing system and replace it with a different system. That's what an actual revolution is. And yes, you know, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of people, I remember, you know, after I think it was Parkland shooting, you know, there was big rallies that were held, and one of the students from there, you know, got up to speak at one of these big rallies, and the first thing he said was, "Welcome to the revolution," because there were, you know, large numbers, masses of people there. Well, masses of people are one important ingredient of a revolution. You don't make a revolution with a handful of people. You need, you know, millions of people ultimately to make a revolution. But the question is, what are those people fighting for? What are they aiming for? Are they aiming just to make changes within the existing system, or are they actually recognizing that you cannot bring about the positive resolution of all these different horrors that exist in this country, and we could go through them, but in the world as a whole? You know, you cannot bring about a positive resolution to that, an elimination of all that, within the confines of this system. That is another scientifically determined, evidence-based truth. And so therefore, a revolution means that you overthrow the system in order to, you know, bring into being a completely different foundation in how the economy functions, different relations among people that are not oppressive, a different culture that, instead of reinforcing all this garbage and oppression, actually reinforces emancipating relations among people and emancipating ideas among people, you know, and all the political structures also are transformed in order to serve the further transformation of society, to uproot all the underlying basis for all this exploitation and oppression. That's a revolution. Nothing short of that is an actual revolution.
You also wrote last year a framework and a roadmap for how a real revolution could be wrenched out of the crisis that we are currently living through in this country at this time, the main title of which is Something Terrible or Something Truly Emancipating. And a lot of decent people look out at the world. If they're not sheltering from it and refusing to look, a lot of decent people see the terrible or dimensions of it. They see the looming threat of open inter-imperialist war, even nuclear war, the environmental crisis. They see the rising fascism in this country and the obliteration of really essential rights of the people. And you write about that and you analyze that, but you also see the potential for something truly emancipating. And I wonder if you could, I would like to ask you to talk about, what do you see as the positive potential? What is that?
Well, the positive potential is the other side of everything you just described. In other words, and in particular, the fighting that's going on within the ranks of the ruling class itself, where they cannot resolve their differences in the way that they have held the country together and ruled it for like over 100 years, almost going back to the Civil War. I mean, obviously, in the Civil War, they had an all-out fight between different sections of the ruling class, the slave-owning class and the capitalist class. But since they resolved that, you know, they basically had this procedure. They have elections, you know, the winner takes office, and the losers accept the results of the election. It's the peaceful transfer of power that they're always bragging about, which is the peaceful transfer of power. Let's be real and get down to the real of it. It's the peaceful transfer of power from one section of the ruling class to another section of the ruling class. And these days, one section represented by the Democratic Party and another section represented by the Republican Party. But what's different now is that the Republican Party is made up of people, and it has a social base of people who no longer recognize the legitimacy of that process unless it results in what they want it to result in. And they regard, this is important to understand, they regard whole sections of the people as illegitimate. They regard gay people, trans people, they regard, you know, independent women, you know, ones who are not just, you know, willingly, quote unquote, but not so willingly subordinate to men. black people, immigrants, Latinos, they regard all those people as illegitimate. And the reason that this base of people out there in the tens of millions actually, for the most part, I think actually believes, because they believe all kinds of nonsense and crazy theories, but I think most of them actually believe that the election in 2020 was illegitimate. And they've been given a rationalization for that, the election was stolen, there was massive fraud, et cetera, et cetera. But what's just barely beneath the surface, and the real reason they think that election was illegitimate, was that all these people I just mentioned overwhelmingly voted for someone other than them. And those people are illegitimate in their eyes. Therefore, the election was illegitimate. That's what really going on here. And so why have they come to that position? Because, up until World War II, this was a country where white supremacy was institutionalized, legalized in the law, was supported by all sections of the ruling class. Some may say some words about this or that, but they all were part of its institutionalizing it, where women were in a second-class position, subordinated and oppressed and brutalized in all kinds of ways that there was no legal redress for. You could legally rape your wife throughout the country until at least the 1980s in many states. And forget about any gay rights or trans rights or anything like that. So, that's the way, and it was a country that, while it theoretically had the separation of church and state, was all but officially a Christian nation. I mean, look at the currency and how the government institutions begin with a prayer and so on and so forth. And then, in these people's eyes, along came this evil woman, Madalyn Murray O'Hair, who challenged, prayer in the schools. And things were changing in the country. So the ruling class, through the Supreme Court, made a concession and ruled in her favor. And they said, because we have in the Constitution separation of church and state, therefore you can't have state institutions like public education officially promoting a particular religion or religion in general. So, and if you listen to these Christian fascists, and that's what they are, they're white supremacists, male supremacists, virulently anti-immigrant, patriarchal, misogynist, racist, all this, anti-gay, all the rest of it. If you listen to them, many of them will say, and do say openly, everything in this country went to hell when they threw the God out of the schools. And they're fighting to get, quote unquote, God back into the schools, because the God they're talking about is the God of the Christian Bible, which is, just in its very, deep nature, is a patriarchal document. I mean, you just look at it and read it, and, I've read the whole thing. And it's just patriarchy from beginning to end, from Genesis to Paul, and Jesus too in certain ways. But it's just overall a patriarchal document. And so, once that got undermined, once the state couldn't go, promoting that, these people see this as the unraveling of everything. And it's interesting. Most of them, for a while, wanted to openly be white supremacists. They wanted to openly oppose the civil rights movement, openly, insist on segregation. You look at Jerry Falwell, who founded the Moral Majority, and all the rest of these types like that. Falwell was vigorously opposed to the civil rights movement. But then at a certain point, they realized, well, we're not going to win that fight. And plus, it's a disadvantage to us to keep pushing on that, because the wind is going the other way on that. So what did they do? They retrenched into patriarchy. Not that they weren't still white supremacists, but in terms of what they brought to the forefront, they were always, misogynistic, patriarchal forces anyway. But then, they brought that to the fore and started making abortion the big question, that make it what it is. The key, concentration of whether women are going to be enslaved or whether they're going to be on the road to being emancipated. And they've been fighting, rallying reactionary forces around that as the concentration, along with the kicking of God out of the schools, the concentration of everything that's wrong in this society. And, I've told this story before. Richard Pryor, back in the 70s or whatever, had this routine where he'd say, talking about these fascist types, these Nazi types, these types that are now the MAGA people, And he said, brothers say they're not afraid of no Nazis. Hey, Mr. Nazi! He said, but if you actually see a real Nazi, you're going to be running fast as you can run. Well, and then he went on to say, you got to understand, they got all these people down in the basement, chained up down in the basement. And you don't want to see those people get off the chain and out of the basement, because they are going to come after you, and they're going to come after everything that you hold dear. Well, the fact is, those people are out of the basement and off the chain. We could talk more about why, it gets more, we have to get more into things. But they're out of the basement and off the chain, and they have no intention of going back. So, and then the Republican Party unleashed this base, and now there's this kind of back and forth, or dialectic, as we say, where the base is imposing necessity on the official politicians to go along with it, and then when the politicians go along with it, then that gives even more encouragement to the base to become even more rabid. And there's no way these people are going to settle for the continuation of limitations, not the ending, just any kind of limitation on white supremacy, male supremacy. You can't have all this gay stuff, all this trans stuff, blah, blah, blah. There's no way they're going to accept any of that, even this impartial and ultimately not that significant concessions. So, they're not going to let a government come to power that is illegitimate in their eyes because it's making concessions to all these things that they think are completely intolerable. And that's why you hear them say, this is war. When do we get to start shooting? All these kind of things. Well, they're not, and you hear the Democrats complaining that the Republicans, are, a threat. Even Biden now started to call them semi-fascists. That's about as much as he could go. When they're, just outright blatant and aggressive fascists. White supremacists, male supremacists, all the things I was running down. So the Democrats keep complaining, well, they're not playing by the rules. They're not going by the norms. They're breaking the norms. At the same time, the fascists are openly and aggressively saying, yes, that's exactly what we want to do. We want to break all these norms because these norms are leading this country into a shithole. And, we can't go with that anymore. And so they're not willing to go along with the normal stuff that's been happening. Okay, that's why you could get, besides what's going on in the international arena, with a growing threat, people should wake up, a growing threat of nuclear war, and with the U.S. provoking China, U.S. imperialists, Biden, Nancy Pelosi, provoking China over Taiwan on the one hand and backing Ukraine against, yes, real Russian aggression, but the U.S. is not opposing that because they want to liberate people anywhere. They're the biggest enslavers of people on the entire planet. But what they do want to do, and the Secretary of Defense openly said they want to weaken Russia. So they're arming and backing and giving intelligence and planning and everything. They're basically using Ukrainian troops to fight Russia at this point, with American and its NATO allies arming them. This is, and now you got Putin talking about if Russian integrity and territory and the Russian people are threatened, we'll use, he said it twice, we'll use every weapon at our disposal. So that means nuclear weapons. And then the U.S. says, well, if they use even tactical nuclear weapons, there will be a very heavy price to pay, and we've told the Russians what that price will be. What the fuck are they talking about? They're talking about the future and the existence of humanity. With this Russia thing and China thing, and then there's a whole environment which you see what's happening with it. Countries, a third of Pakistan underwater, to just cite, and the recent hurricanes, which are worse because of the warming of the oceans and other things. So, all this is going on, and there's no way they can put this all together on the terms in which they ruled it for all this time. And that could lead to something, just think about what I was just talking about, something really terrible. But it also provides an opening because all this shakes people awake. I mean, look what happened when they overturned Roe v. Wade and the right to abortion. millions of people who went along thinking, oh, they'll never really do that, and things are okay, and things will work out, got really, shaken down to their toes by what, and people are still extremely upset about this, and these kind of things are going to keep on happening, and this is going to shake people out of the sense that they can just, things are just going to go along the way they always have. They're going to cause people to question things. And then you got the people at the base of society who are always catching hell but are caught up in a lot of bullshit. And life is going to get even worse for them too. And this is where the revolutionaries come in. Because left to itself, all this will go only one way, to something terrible. But this provides a greater objective basis to actually break the hold of this system over people and to win them to see the need to uproot and abolish this whole system, and to understand that we can no longer afford to allow these imperialists in this country or others to have the fate of humanity in their hands with the extremely dangerous and increasingly existential threat that poses to human civilization. And among these basic people at the foundation of society, the people catching the most hell, we can go to them, and we need to go to them and explain to them what's going on in very simple terms, maybe a little shorter than what I just did. But give them a basic understanding of what's going on and what their role can be and needs to be in terms of transforming this terrible situation into an emancipating situation by building up, not going at the system all out right now when all you could do is get crushed, but building up, putting revolution on the map, putting a scientifically based revolution on the map in terms of youth from among the basic people, youth from among the educated, the college educated, but especially the people catching the worst hell, taking the stage, and we can and have to say to them, this is your mission. This is your mission, to put revolution on the map. Not all this garbage that people think is, want to think is the way to go, all this, I got my mind on my money and my money on my mind and dogging down the women and all this bullshit. Put revolution on the map. Put it on the map by standing up against this system. You want to do something that takes heart? Take on this system. Stand up against this system and all of its atrocities and build up the forces of revolution so that we can create the conditions where we can have millions of people ready to go for the whole thing. Similarly to what you see in Iran now. I don't know where that'll go. You need leadership for it to go to revolution. Our comrades there, the communists, in Iran, the people who've taken up a new communism, they're striving and struggling to win leadership and give leadership in that situation. But that kind of massive upheaval, you have that, and then you have an organized leadership with a scientific method and strategy. Then you can direct all that toward the actual struggle to bring this system down, and you can actually have a basis to defeat and disintegrate what are now very powerful institutions of armed enforcement of this system. It's not where we're at now, but that's the mission that people need to take up. And all these youth in particular who are caught up in going at each other need to turn around, lift their heads, not act in the way the system wants them to act, not act in the way that it tells them is the only thing that they're good for, but act as emancipators of humanity. And act to get rid of all the madness that they are put through, and people just like them all over the world are put through, which is the reason why they act in such crazy ways, because they don't see a way out of that. And we, with a scientific method and strategy, have to provide them, give them the way out of that, and nothing less than that.
Well, you've already taken us to what we wanted to end the first interview with you on the show, and by singing, I think, at least 3 times on this show, which has been great, because what we wanted to do is in 2003, you gave a talk that we call the Revolution Talk, and I don't know, hours into it, all of a sudden you burst into song, a Ry Cooder song, Across the Borderline.
Now my voice is hoarse, but I'm going to give this a try. There's a land, so I've been told.
And then later on, a decade later, I guess the band Outer National took that and put it into a song that we've played many times on the show.
There's a land, so I've been told. Every street is paved with gold, and it's just across the borderline.
And then you've also spoken, see, you've taken a lot of things out from what we said. I just want to make sure everybody sees this. We were just talking before about these are 45 records.
Yeah.
Okay, this is vinyl's not coming back in this form. But look, this is your memoir, From Ike to Mal and Beyond: My Journey from Mainstream America to Revolutionary Communist. But there you are with the record. So, and you just spoke about the influence of the culture, black culture. But we wanted to ask you about this because you've written and talked about how if you don't have a poetic spirit, or at least a poetic side, it's very dangerous for you to lead a Marxist movement or be the leader of a socialist state. This question of the poetic side, and you've written about, including to people of our, who've not had a formal education, the importance of Shakespeare and how you can understand that. You've spoken some already tonight about the influence of black music on you, but poetry, literature, these are things that have had a big influence on you. So we wanted to ask you two things. One, how did this shape you, who you are? And then more, why does it matter to have a poetic spirit to lead a revolution?
Well, you see, you held up that memoir cover, and you see that tells you what at the time I thought looked cool. So, so you can draw your own conclusions about that. What does it reflect about the times and perhaps about me at the time too? But
well, you missed a whole discussion here last night about the Beach Boys, and then what happened in the move to black culture and all the developments. But
well, I'm sorry I missed it. Sounds good. Sounds interesting. But to get to your question, look, I think human beings need. This is a point that's been made, but it's important to keep coming back to this. Human beings need to be amazed. That's part of what it means to be human. You get amazed when you see an amazing painting or a cultural performance or something someone does in athletics, and you get a certain joy from being amazed at something, especially in a positive way. And this is one element of it. But more generally, human beings have a need for beauty. And beauty comes in many different forms. It comes in nature. And yes, different people do find different things beautiful, but still there's a need for beauty. It comes in nature, it comes in music, it comes in poetry, it comes in literature generally. It comes in many different forms. A sunset and so on and so forth. If the kind of world we're aiming for is not one where that kind of beauty is discounted or, suppressed, but one where the human being's need for that is given much fuller expression. And a lot of that is suppressed in people. Life is so hard for so many people, and things are so bitter that they don't, and they're scuffling so hard they don't even have the chance to enjoy much beauty, though they do find ways even so. So, the kind of world we're aiming for is a world where the human ability to, appreciate beauty in many different forms would be given much fuller expression. And that links up with the question. There's also beauty in the intellectual realm. Look at this, telescope and what it's showing us about the universe. There's beauty in that. There's wonder in that. Isn't that important for human beings to have a full life? And the same when you're trying to solve a problem, not just a political problem, but trying to understand a phenomenon in nature, and then you finally do understand it. It's a very exhilarating experience. The same is true in literature. Like, you mentioned Shakespeare. Well, a lot of Shakespeare language is archaic. It means it's outdated. It means language that people all would have understood generally at the time, but not all of it, not even most of it. But some of it is language that we no longer use. Most people don't go around saying forsooth and so on and so forth, and there are other expressions that are even, more abstract to people, or, unfamiliar to people now. But there's a lot of beauty in the language of Shakespeare. And let's be clear. There are a lot of dead people who are not white who have also created a lot of beauty in the world, and too much of that has been suppressed. But there are also dead white men who have created a lot of beauty, and we should not be prevented from enjoying that as well. And Shakespeare is one of them. The language is beautiful. As I said in my memoir, I enjoy puns. There are all kinds of puns in Shakespeare. Some of them are better than others. But there are all kinds of humor. There's even malapropisms, which means misusing or a word, saying a word wrong, or I remember one. I think it's in Macbeth, the play Macbeth, which by the way was a favorite of Huey Newton. He used to quote Act 5, Scene 5, Macbeth. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in its petty pace from day to day, etc. But earlier in there's a scene where there's this drunken gatekeeper at one of the castles, and he opens the gate and he starts rambling on and on. And at one point he says, makes a comparison. He says, but comparisons are odorous. Now it's actually supposed to be comparisons are odious. Odious means hateful. But he's drunk and he does a malapropism. He says, but after all, comparisons are odorous. Means they stink, So, even things like that are, I get a kick out of it. It's funny. It's a good use of a malapropism. It's a good use of language, and distorting language for the purpose of humor. And different people like different poets, modern poetry from the Romantic period. I happen to like Keats as I was growing up. I found the language very evocative. It made me think about a lot of things. And it also just, it created a certain feeling. Beyond just, what it made me think about, created a certain feeling. Bright star, were I as steadfast as thou art. Just looking at a star and saying, okay, this star is, seems to have a lot of constancy. It's there all the time. Would that I could be as firm as that. Things like that, make you think, make you feel. If you don't have an appreciation for that, then when you turn to politics, you're going to tend to be very dogmatic. And you're going to be very dry. And nobody's going to live in any kind of world that you have anything to do with setting the terms of. At least I certainly wouldn't. And I don't think most people would. So this is what I mean when I say, you don't have to write poetry. That's not my point. But, you have to have an appreciation for beauty in all these different kinds of ways, or else you're not aiming for the kind of society that we need to be aiming for, where human beings can really thrive in the fullest way and in the fullest dimensions.
Well, we want to thank you for this first installment of interviews with Bob Avakian on the Revolution Nothing Less show. It's really been important. It's been fun.
It's been a thrill.
A thrill. It's been
thrill
melodic. And we're looking forward to
At least
continue.
we hope so.
Okay, so thank you once
Well,
again.
I appreciate being able to do this. And I think it's very important what's being done with this show.
Hi. If you've been watching this interview, I think you should have a sense of what a difference it could make if it could reach beyond the thousands who've already seen it, to the hundreds of thousands, and to the millions eventually who need to see it. Think of what a difference it could make if this interview with Bob Avakian was a point of reference very broadly in society. You have a role to play in that. We are we're in the midst of a major fund drive to raise $100,000 to get this interview out in a big way and to get the revolution out there in a big way, to begin to put it on the map. This Sunday, we are doing a fundraising live stream where we are aiming to raise $20,000. This is a chance for you to not just support the revolution, but be part of the revolution. Be part of the most important thing you could be part of, the emancipation of humanity, bringing people hope on a solid scientific foundation. Donate on Sunday, watch on Sunday, organize others to watch. We'll be going into more in the interview. We'll be talking with people who are working on the ground to make this into a force in society. This is a time for you to be part of that.